Hello, I'm the Angry Spork. This Saturday, January 26th, is the in-universe birthday of my favorite Batgirl, Cassandra Cain.
This being the 20th year of the character's creation, I figured I'd have a few Cass-centric episodes this season, including the month of May for something a little extra special. Yes, I know Linkara is planning something as well that time, but I'm not going to let coincidence stop me.
For now, I'm taking issue with Batgirl's Secret Files and Origins from a host of writers and artists. Let's see if this comic makes us want to turn the page or turn our heads.
The cover sees Batgirl number 4 descending upon some masked hoods. It's an appropriately dynamic enough cover for the character, so much so that it was reused for one of the trades. The first page has an index of stories and the creators behind them.
Which means I won't be listing them off like I usually do. That's right, you can read for yourselves for a change. I've gone mad with power in the third season! Oh, my pride.
The first story, appropriately called Batgirl, sees a young Cassandra playfully lunging her hand forward, only to lose her sunny demeanor when she draws blood. She seems to get smaller, or maybe the perspective is just weird in this room, as she is suddenly older, and now behind prison bars. She's then in her Batgirl costume before she wakes up to the real world, and to a call from Oracle.
The best part of waking up is when you're no longer in a symbolism-coated dream reliving a childhood trauma. I keep trying to sell that as a new ad campaign for Folgers, but all I get in return are rejection letters and restraining orders.
It's not long before she's in costume and relieving some suited goons of their guns, faster than any of them can react. Captions for a file on her are seen noting her real name is unknown, odd, and she has no superpowers. A different masked gunman fails to hit her with his machine gun. Fortunately, she doesn't hold much of a grudge, because not only does she save him from the goons' backup guns, but also from a surprise new player whom she teaches which way elbows are not supposed to bend.
Yeah, the fact that there's blood soaking into the sleeve means bone broke through. It's brutal and grisly, but not only is it not necessarily outside Cassie's wheelhouse for this time period, it's a lot less potentially fatal than chopping someone's arm off, and significantly less graphic in this example.
After she unmasks the lone gunman, he starts pleading for a quick death as he falls to the ground weeping. Later, Oracle discovers the kid is named Tom Lavino, a 15-year-old whose parents recently died, the father of which happened to be a bookkeeper for the Gabrini family. Despite all the witnesses to his parents' murders, there aren't any leads. Given how many members of the Bat family have lost one or both parents, it makes Tom somewhat sympathetic. After noting this, Barbara realizes she may have touched a nerve with Cass, who actually just wants to know where to find the Gabrini patriarch. B-Girl heads out on patrol while computer file narration notes how mysterious she still is, and how she seems to have worked past an apparent death wish.
I still have a kind of death wish. I wish for the death of this awful retcon.
While Cassandra takes time to help out a homeless woman, the narrator, probably Oracle composing the file, guesses Cass has no living parents, figuring that either through purchase or kidnapping, David Cain came into possession of her, one among several children he'd tried to train, and had found an appropriate heir with the baby that could hit a bullseye with a shuriken.
Baby throwing a throwing star with crazy accuracy. It walks that line between the delightfully ludicrous nature of comics and overpowering a character needlessly when they have no superpowers. I think that it really just denotes Cassie's innate ability in one particular respect, and given her parentage, it sort of makes sense, but I'll confess it does kind of stretch things a bit. But let's remember, DC's done far worse with less worthy characters.
Flashbacks continue as present-day Cass goes about her business. She was trained to use various weapons, explosives, but hand-to-hand combat was of largest focus, being enveloped by it to the point where she attained her trademark ability to read people's emotions and movements just by watching. She could even shrug off bullet wounds in order to counterattack. Then came her first kill, and she realized how wrong the act felt. She ran from the closest home and family she'd ever known, and eventually ended up in Gotham, acting as Oracle's messenger during No Man's Land, saving Commissioner Gordon from David Cain of all people, and taking up the mantle of Batgirl.
But what if Cassie had ended up in one of DC's other notable cities? Would she have become the new gangbuster or guardian in Metropolis? Or in Central City, do you think she would have somehow become the fastest mute alive? Any of those are preferable to her reinvented version.
A chance encounter with a telepath gave her the ability to speak, but at the cost of her fighting ability. So she sought training under another story entirely, and I'll get to that later in the year. Now, back in proper form, she confronts the head of the Gabrini family, telling him to back off Lavino. The old man just scoffs that the kid is just another killer, and that's all he'll ever be. And he tries pulling a piece on Batgirl, but she swiftly seizes it and points the barrel at his own head. She fires a few rounds, intentionally avoiding a fatality, except possibly to the guy's eardrums.
Apologize to my tinnitus.
I just love that look of surprise and fear on the old man's face after he's been thoroughly schooled by someone he thought he could take out so easily. It's a Bat Family classic.
B-Girl later visits Tom in a local correctional facility, assuring him that she can relate to how he's feeling, though he's not really buying it. He found out his dad was an entirely different person, but he loved him despite the things he'd done. That's when a group of juvenile delinquents walk in, possibly for some hazing, but Batgirl tells them to leave. Only one remains, trying to be the tough guy, but she changes his mind after saying please, in her own special way.
This sequence, the pacing, the final panel, it's such a beautiful thing. It makes me smile. But because I'm the Angry Spork, it enrages me because I remember how quality, thoughtful storytelling like this has been thrown in the trash by DC's stupidity and their committal to amateurish, mediocre schlock that could only hope to measure up, but doesn't, but they keep it because they're idiots.
Alone again, Cassandra confides that she thinks she lost both her parents too. After a moment of silence, Batgirl tells Tom that he may be locked up right now, but it's not going to be forever, and that doing one bad thing doesn't make him a bad person. Something she tries to believe, as she looks through the prison bars, smiling, as the next chapter of her life has only begun.
You know how some TV series will have a clip show? Well, this was kind of like that, but done in sequential narrative, and it's one of the better examples. It relays information that an existing reader might already know, but at the same time, you don't feel like you're slogging through familiar information. For new readers, it relays important details that, if they're interested, they can look up in back issues and get the better context. Kudos to Scott Peterson and the editors on this one.
After bios for Cass and Shiva, we get the next story, New Threat File. A pair of female agents are asking how Lady Shiva just appeared in an empty cell in Gotham PD, looking like she'd just been in a fight. This is Gotham City, so the desk officer isn't overly impressed by the ninja-looking woman who's so difficult to defeat, and her resume of being a thuggy practitioner and worshipped by some as the living embodiment of death itself.
Is one of those worshippers a purple alien with a big old raisin chin? Because I think I smell the next DC Marvel crossover. And this one could end in a wedding.
Later, the pair question a tattoo artist that's done some ink for new thuggy recruits. A little arm twisting gets him to agree to give what information he can, so long as he stays out of it, intimidated by the death cultists. The dark-haired agent, Wit, thinks she sees something move, but her blonde cohort brushes it off. Driving to their next location, they wonder who could have defeated and locked up a formidable martial artist like Shiva, if her victorious opponent was someone like Killer Croc or something. But they're there just to obtain data and not to encounter who it is they're looking up. They arrive at a place called Taste of Ganges, and who could that be clinging to the back of their car?
That's right. Batgirl has been tailing them.
Inside, they've tasered a couple of thuggy brutes into submission, but they're street-level goons, not full members, and thus not privy to a whole lot on the group. All they know is that Shiva's defeat happened in her temple. That's their next stop, and I guess they brought that one perp for directions or something? At least that explained the one silhouette without a flashlight. The agents are suddenly surrounded by more cultists, and playing the government agents card doesn't faze them. The Thuggee do not fear government. The Thuggee do not fear death. The Thuggee fear And suddenly they all hear their mommies calling them home for dinner. Or at least that's what they'll tell everyone, instead of the fact that they ran from the mere presence of Batgirl. She tells them, with no ellipses breaking up her dialogue, oddly enough, that the trail they're on doesn't lead to some monster. Go away. And the story ends with the two women doing just that.
I felt this was a nicely done story, somewhat about Cass, but not entirely featuring her, which is okay. It may feel a bit like filler, but at the very least, it's the kind that's sometimes necessary and appropriately placed in this example. I said necessary and appropriately placed. That's right. Hang your head in shame off screen.
After a bio for a sporty-looking Oracle, we get the short story Batgirl vs. Batgirl. Cass is maskless and bored, as there doesn't seem to be an emergency she can punch to resolution. Oracle sends her to the Hollow Room, and Cassandra lets the computer pick her opponent. Opponent? Batgirl. No, I'm Batgirl. But when she finds out it's a simulation of her mentor, she's ecstatic. I mean, just look at that face as she's masking up. But the elation fades when Hollow Babs goes down in just under a second. Such a sophisticated and advanced machine manages to run a diagnostic real quick, finding there are no errors, so Cass runs the program again. And again, and again, each time winning the fight faster and faster, eventually cutting it down to roughly a third of her original time.
Well, I managed to finish a crossword on my phone app in 0 seconds. I think it was a glitch, but hey, I'm counting it.
Now a little full of herself, Cass wonders how this Batgirl ever survived as she was. Then she sees her ankle snared by her opponent's bat line, and we see Oracle watching from her station. That's how. And I really dig the two differing logos for the title at the bottom.
This one was short and sweet, succinctly displaying how Cassie has some superior skills, but her predecessor was still capable in her own right. In its own way, it respects what came before instead of trying to outright replace it with some diluted sense of entitlement. Cass's overconfidence means that someone with Barbara's training has a 1 in 6 chance of catching her off guard. That's not nothing.
The last 3 pages are bios. Second to last is Censor and Force 14, then Barbara as Batgirl, and David Cain. Though this one came before the others, I pointed it out last because there's something I want to point out. Something I think is important and worth noting. Towards the end, in relation to Cass running away after her first kill, it says, Cain was surprisingly devastated by her disappearance, and has never been the same since. Interesting, no? Almost like he was someone with a level of depth and personality and feelings and cared. Imagine that.
And that was Batgirl's Secret Files and Origins. It's a nice refresher after not having read Cass's early stuff in a while, and even though it sums up her origin in about 20 pages, it does so with the understanding that there's more to her story that's available to read. Also done better than others.
There were a few different art styles, especially with the bios, that I thought were fine in each their own way. Though, in the first story, there's a panel where Cassandra looks like an alien, and when those other juvie kids arrive, Tom looks like he's happy? Eager that they showed up? He was weeping a panel ago, so what's the deal? And when the Thuggee are surrounding those agents, I think the pacing would have been improved if, after they were being boastful, but before they ran away, there was one more panel of them just standing there in silence, maybe with shocked expressions on their faces. And I think they could have done more to clearly identify both agents, because I don't exactly recognize them. I think the blonde is supposed to be Cameron Chase, who, if I remember correctly, worked for Bruce Wayne for a short time and discovered he was Batman, but I can't remember.
If you're not familiar with Cassie's original good incarnation, or not familiar with the character at all, this is a good read to get a feeling for the character and who she is. And in general, they're just good stories on their own. Now, if only anyone at DC Comics in the last 8 years had bothered to read it themselves. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.